There's a report just out in the New York Times today that the Biden administration is considering arguments to arm Ukraine to push Russia out of Crimea. This would represent a wholesale change from the Biden administration's policy previously, where they had taken a hard line on this issue. And this news comes just as I was reading a piece in Asia Times by Brendan Weichert published yesterday, in which Weichert quotes Robert Gates, the former defense secretary, as saying the problem with U.S. foreign policy interventions over the last 3 decades has been quote unquote mission creep. The idea that we keep shifting the goalpost mid-game, make it impossible to win. And we saw this in Afghanistan, we saw this in Iraq, we saw this in Syria, we saw this in Libya, and we saw it elsewhere. The fear of many people, and Weicker reiterates this, is that we're seeing this now in Ukraine. And of course, the news just out today that the Biden administration is considering this push to arm Ukraine to help move Russia out of Crimea would represent that. The original stated policy objective, according to the Biden administration, was to rally NATO, to rally our partners, to push Russia out of Western Ukraine, and they largely succeeded at that. And as opposed to taking the win, we're now seeing what Robert Gates might call mission creep and a change in objectives, which obviously would have to go hand in hand with a change in strategy and policy. And regardless of where you stand on this issue, and it is a very difficult issue, the reality is the politicians who control the U.S. military owe it to the American public, they owe it to the world, they certainly owe it to Ukraine, to be very clear on both what their policy is, what their goal is, and what their strategy is to achieve it. If we don't get that kind of clarity, we risk being in a similar situation as to where we found ourselves in Iraq and most recently in Afghanistan.